Welcome back to another sizzling episode of Traveling Through the 80s with the 80s Kids. As always, I'm your host, Rich Oliver, and by my side, as always, is Kyle Lentz.
Hey ho, let's go.
And over standing in the corner by himself is Don Brown.
That's where I like to be, though. I'm
Can't
good.
put Donnie in a corner. You can't
Yeah,
put Donnie in a corner.
I try to be in a circular room so I don't get stuck in the corner. But
And we're going back this week to another interview style. And
Yes.
Kyle, what are we doing this week?
Oh, we had an awesome. I'm so excited. We got a really interesting guest this week. Somebody who has a lot of history, probably influencing a lot of our childhood memories and things like that. We have creator, illustrator, artist, however you want to put a title on it. Bart Sears is here with us. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
yeah,
So, we like I said, I know you have you've worn a lot of hats in the industry because I know we've talked in the past a little bit. But you grew up in Syracuse, correct? Is that
Yep, North Syracuse.
okay? And then
Yeah.
what got you into the art side? Because you're in illustrations and creating and things like that, correct?
Well, I loved heroic fiction, heroes, and I had an older brother. There were always comic books in the house, and I loved those. But I think what I initially wanted to do was write, but my handwriting is illegible, and I never could teach myself to type, so I just started drawing basically, and did a lot of sculpting. We would play with a lot of clay as kids and make our own heroes, and monsters, and stuff, and that led to drawing. So I just picked that up from a pretty early age, and I found I had quite a bit of talent at it, which I was able to, turn into a career.
Was it like along the lines? Now you said comic books and things were influential. Was it like you just take a comic book and try to like duplicate that style or draw that character in some way? Or
Yeah. Initially, I put tracing paper over comic pages.
Mhm.
I remember there was a Neil Adams story, Moon of the Wolf or
Mhm.
something, in one of those 80-page giants they used to have. And I would put, that just blew me away. And I decided that's why I wanted to draw comics. So to try to figure it out, I would trace stuff and try to figure out why the lines were like they were and how the structure went and stuff. And then pretty soon I was just drawing on my own. I was like
cool.
10 then, I think.
Oh
10 or
yeah,
11.
yeah. That's awesome. So now, from there, you're obviously journeying into education and learning more about art. So where did you go to learn some of the industry style of it?
Well, actually, in high school, I was very lucky. I had an art teacher, Mr. D'Angelo. Remember his name, which is rare for me remembering names, but he was a big influence. He knew he was a sculptor, and he was, I don't know, a fellow at SU or whatever it's called. He was affiliated with SU, and he taught at Cicero High School where I went. And he could see I wanted to be more into illustration and stuff. And he was pulled me aside, like I think in 10th grade, and said, "Look, I don't really know a lot about illustration. I'm a sculptor." He was surrealist, or I don't think that's the right word, but he wasn't a realistic artist. And
Right.
He gave me some Andrew Loomis books that he had, and let me just kind of keep them. One or two, I can't remember which, and not keep them, but I could bring them with me and take them home and stuff. And he just tried to give me assignments that were illustrative, so I didn't really have to do what the rest of the class did, which was really, really cool and super instrumental in helping me get a lot better very quickly. And from there, I went to the Joe Kubert School.
Oh wow!
In New Jersey when I was 18. Dropped out my second year because I hated to draw, and then moved furniture for about 6 months and said, "This stinks." So I did some samples and got working hard.
Oh wow! So
it was
now,
different days then. Nobody wanted to draw comics back then. It was, comics.
Right. What year around is that you're getting into?
82, 85.
Okay.
Oh,
into
So yeah, because comics were kind of it was just a kind of this niche group of people that were into it. You know, it
but they
wasn't
sold great.
not what it is today.
right.
Yeah.
I was gonna say
Sold great.
85 was about the time everything was just getting ready to explode again with comics, in the
Yeah.
late 80s. So
Yep. Yep. Those Justice League books came out and were, had the humor and they were well
Mhm.
drawn, and then they did
Those
Justice League,
international,
which
yeah,
I was lucky enough to do, and that just kind of
great.
sparked a whole lot of. And Spider-Man was big. McFarlane got big, and
oh yeah.
things just took off. By the '90s, they were rolling,
I
and
know.
then of course the card collectors got in. The guys that destroyed the trading card market
Right.
Yeah.
got into comics
Yep.
and did the same there. So
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But see,
collectors.
it's funny because like that 80s to 90s rolling, like the artists became like these rock stars. I mean, it was a really
Mhm.
big deal. Which artist you were buying and why you bought this
Yeah.
book because of that artist. And it was such a cool
And Wizard
time.
Magazine. Wizard
Yes.
Magazine was awesome for the time, but
Mhm.
that
Yeah, 'cause
magazine was great for years.
It
Right.
showcased
Like that
those talents.
that was like pre-internet pretty much, where that's where you're gonna find your information was
Yep.
Wizard. So
Yeah, it
Exactly.
listed tons of comics and creators. I mean, just it was a fun magazine for the comic industry. It was really, I think it really helped propel everything that happened, the surge of Valiant, Image,
Oh
and
yeah.
oh
all
yeah.
that stuff. It just,
Mhm.
it people were excited to get Wizard Magazine. I remember every month they were
Mhm.
clamoring for that as much as their favorite comics.
Absolutely.
So
That
it's
is
pretty
so.
cool.
I mean, now Cuba school that's a pretty challenging school to get into now, because you have to have a pretty decent portfolio. I'm not sure how it was when you went, but I'm assuming it was still pretty competitive.
It's an art school. They
Yeah.
need artists. So if you can pay, you can
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. Right.
'Cause
Always comes
I was
down to
really
cash.
worried about it, about going there because it was Joe Kubert, and
Mhm.
all this
Yeah.
stuff. And my art teacher, Mr. D'Angelo's, helped me put my portfolio together to go down in senior year for get a review. And he could
Mhm.
see I was, really nervous about this. And he pulled me aside, he's like, "It's an art school. They need people to go to art school. You'll be fine. Don't worry about
Yeah.
it."
So,
I was like,
well,
that makes sense.
anybody that has maybe is thinking of going in that direction, you can kind of give them that pep talk. It's an art
Yeah.
school. So now,
They
how long
need
were
you
you
more
at
than you need
Marvel
them.
Right.
how long were you at Marvel in DC? Were you working through
Well,
those?
my first comic jobs were at Marvel, and I was woefully ill prepared to draw comics because it's the hardest art job I've ever had of everything I've ever done. I mean, it's just you really have to know your crap to put a comic page together
Mm.
and do it, you know, um, quickly enough and competently enough and consistently enough to survive. And I did like three jobs for them and just backed out. It was too much for me.
Really?
Uh,
Wow. That was
Wow.
I got some work at TSR, and
Okay,
a buddy of
so
mine.
like, Dungeons and
I,
Dragons.
yeah, I did like a module or two, and then those know your adventure books or
Mhm.
whatever,
Yeah,
pick your
choose
own
your adventure.
adventure. Where
Yes,
go to
yeah,
page
those are
22
big.
if you want to do this or whatever.
Mhm.
Did a couple of those,
That's
and
cool.
the same time, I had a friend of mine, Mark Pennington, who went to the Kubert School. He went all 3 years, and he had graduated by this time and was just hired at Hasbro to design GI Joe toys.
oh, that's
And
cool. Yeah.
he
Like I
got
said,
he got
that's the
them
childhood.
to hire me to do some production paintings.
Mm.
And the first one I did, I had no idea how to paint, by the way, but
It's like, I'll do it, whatever.
Yeah, well, I'll figure it out, right?
the first one I did was like this massive, I don't know, 28 by 22, like this big fleshy pink monster. I can't remember the toy line it was for, and I don't have any photos,
Oh,
anything.
is that in humanoids? Is that
It might have been it because it would have been
they had the
80,
really tall monster?
85, 86.
I think so. I think they were around there. I could be wrong, but I think it was around that time.
But I had like a month, or I had like 3 weeks or a month to do it. And I remember with a week left, I was like, this is awful. So I threw it out and started over, and I ended up finishing the day it was due. So I had
Wow.
to drive it from Syracuse to Rhode Island
Oh,
to
no,
deliver
yeah.
it. So it got there in time because I
Wow.
didn't, there's no way I could FedEx it or whatever.
Right, right.
Right.
And it was painted on canvas, right? So I mean,
No,
you
it was
know,
an illustration board.
okay, all right.
Okay.
And I don't remember. I must have used Dr. Martin's dyes. I don't know. I don't even remember. That was a blur. I was so stressed out doing that. And they
And
liked it enough that they hired me to do G.I. Joe paintings. So I did about 7 or 8, presentation paintings that they would take in to
Mhm.
their big conference room. And it was more like an auditorium, and they would line them up. And the owners would go by and say, make that one, make that one, make that one. Make that one. And
What an interesting process.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How many
it was-
how many other like artists were there? I mean, if you're doing one,
Uh,
they have. I mean, was it?
well, they
100?
hired Dave Dorman. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yes, very familiar with
did
Dave Dorman's work.
That's where he got to start. He did tons of them.
Okay.
And God, who else did them? I can't think of the names. I'm horrible at names. But there were 3 or 4 guys pretty regularly that did. Because I think they were doing 30 or 40 Joe paintings to pick. I don't know what was the line, like 22 figures or 30 figures or something.
Something.
So they
Yeah,
do
usually
40
put up a lot.
characters or whatever it was. So there were a lot of
Wow.
paintings to do in that like 2 or 3 month span before that big presentation meeting.
Or like a ship design, like a vehicle or something like that? Is it like a mix of
These
that?
were all
or-
figures. The vehicle
Okay.
guys, that was a separate, separate but equal group.
Yep.
Sure.
And they
Now-
did most of their own stuff because there weren't that many vehicles. I think a guy might do, if it was a big vehicle, he'd do 1 a year. If it was a smaller one, he might do 2, I think, memory serves. And they
So-
pretty much do their own illustrations for them.
I was just wondering, so with that, so they commissioned you to do the paintings. Now, were you able to keep them if they didn't use them, or was that considered their property?
No,
Yeah.
like everything Hasbro got, it went in a file, and
Mhm.
certain set amount of time later, they threw it in a dumpster.
Jesus, you know.
Wonderful.
And there were guys that knew that and would raid the dumpsters
Mm.
consistently. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can
almost any
imagine.
artwork you find from Hasbro in the 70s, 80s, and 90s was from dumpster diving.
Wow.
That's interesting. Well,
Or
so-
guys that smartly took it home. I'd have taken it home. They didn't care.
yeah.
Right.
They were
Right.
throwing it out. I
Now-
wish you would have known.
Are these designs the same ones that make it onto the card backs that the figure was attached to? Is
Nope.
that
Actually, the cops ones did. They were
oh cool.
They
So
were the ones that were on the back of the first and I think the second year pack. Because the second year, which is weird, I did 2 whole years of the toy in 1 year, but the second year, we weren't supposed to do them. They sent them out to a freelancer to do the production paintings, and Mark and I had another buddy, Mark McNabb in Jersey, who was a color guy, a painter. So we said, okay, Mark, you're going to apply to do these jobs. We're going to recommend you, and I'm going to pencil them. Mark's going to ink them, and you're going to paint them. And we got the gig. And I think the head of Boys Toys knew what was going on. He was pretty smart. And our boss probably did too. And they didn't really care because it was cool stuff. And so we did the second year and third year presentation art. And we did the first year package art too, which they were
that's pretty cool.
pretty annoyed with me, but well, they were big bulky figures with,
Yeah.
real heroic. Because they wanted to do the cops initially on the G.I. Joe buck just at 5 inches. And I was like, that buck is so boring. These are heroic, comic book style characters. So I talked them into letting me do the heroic size buck and the fat buck and the skinnier heroic buck, which was pretty cool. And I got to design the bucks too, which was really neat. But
That's cool.
when they hired McNabb to do the package art, and he sent it in, all these broad-shouldered guys, and for some reason they didn't want any artwork to go behind the bubble, the plastic bubble on the top of the card.
Yeah.
And it was kind of funny because I'm sort of coaching McNabb on what to tell them when they're yelling at him. Meanwhile, I'm on the other side of the thing saying, this is awesome. Why do you guys care what's behind the bubble? You know, the bubble's clear. You can still see the art. It's ridiculous.
Right.
So they went with it, but then they didn't hire us for the second year and that's why the second year all the guys are shouldered and squeezed off to the side.
Right.
You know,
With
now that you
extra.
mention it, I never really noticed on like GI Joes and Star Wars. Did the pictures go behind the bubbles? I never really.
No, they were usually off to
Is
the
that like a
side.
standard industry thing?
At
Try
least
to
for
keep it.
Hasbro.
Really? Yeah.
It's because then if you rip the plastic bubble off, you can still see the picture, I guess. I
Right.
assume. I don't know. Yeah.
They had weird rules. And,
Well, when we were kids, we all
Marketing,
collected
but-
those cardboard backings. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We would always.
Right.
So I guess
Well,
you know.
you can mail them in for free figures sometimes. It was pretty,
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
pretty
yeah.
cool.
That's
Now,
crazy.
so did you design all the characters from Cops? Is that like your, so you had, did they just give you, hey, these are the characters? Or did
Well,
you say,
Cops was a
we need
concept they bought from an outside development.
okay.
You know, there's a lot of, I guess, small companies that throw out a bunch of toy ideas and shop them to all the toy companies, and you know they buy some or not. And they bought Cops, and I can't remember how many characters were in the thing, maybe 6 or 7, but they were all just swipes from famous Marvel comics. I mean, obviously the big boss, he was a swipe from a John Romita Sr. Kingpin.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
and it was
Makes sense.
they were pretty bad swipes. I mean, they could have done a better job of swiping them, but
Yeah.
and so I just took whatever characters those were and you know redrew them cool, and then you know tweaked them however we had talked about they needed tweaking, and then you know added whatever characters were needed. And then second and third year were all completely me, and they wanted to go less real and more superhero in second and third year. That's why the character is a lot crazier in second and third.
Yeah,
year.
that makes sense. Yeah. So, but that's kind of cool because now you're creating these characters. They're sculpting them into a 3-dimensional, you know, image, and then you can kind of. Now, did you actually go into like the toy stores and go, "Hey, that's the character I made," or any of that stuff?
Oh yeah, that was awesome. Going in and seeing them on the
Did you buy
racks.
any of them
They
for
didn't,
yourself?
they didn't stay on the racks long.
Mm.
But they screwed up that line pretty bad because at the same time they were doing air raiders. Which
Oh yes,
is
Right.
their own completely. They own the property air raiders, and they just thought it was going to be gangbusters.
it was not.
All those guys in voice were like, really, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, because it was super cheap to make. I mean, from design all the way through. That's not
Yeah. You know, somebody was in that boardroom going, "They're gonna love it."
Yeah. Yep. And it costs nothing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, because it's funny because when you were doing paints, like I was doing paints on the for the figures for Cops, I think I had like I can't remember how it was broken down, but it was like 8 cents a character to paint, and like each color was a penny or something, depending on how much space it took. So you had to, okay, well, I can't do this part yellow, so that's all going to be blue, you know, or whatever. It was just so down to I mean, literally to the penny, and they were just spending pennies on creating these things. But they thought air raiders was going to be great, and I don't know if it's still the same, but back then they had to order the factory and how many units they were going to make before they had sales figures.
Oh,
so they were guesstimating,
Mm-hmm.
and they thought air raiders was going to be great, so they pumped all their money into air raiders, and they're like, Cops might be all right. So they just put a little money in that.
Yeah.
And the Cops sold out, and stores were clamoring for more, and they couldn't make them because it was too late. Christmas season was over, and air raiders, I remember going to the Hasbro store because they had a store where they, as an employee, you could go in and buy stuff at a reduced price, half price, whatever it was. And it was all air raiders. They had so much air raider stuff that never,
so
ever
like you can take a box when you leave.
Nobody bought that stuff. And even the employees didn't buy that stuff.
Buy one, get 3.
But that killed the Cops line. That first year of stores not being able, because they couldn't fulfill the orders they got from stores, and it flew off the store shelves, and that just killed the toy because they never ordered it again. So second year came out flat, and third year was killed, even though it was all I don't think they've gotten into sculpting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because third year I did remote.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, because
So-
it's too bad because yeah, Cops had the full animated series support. It had like a comic book that went with it.
Yeah.
Narrator's got 4 issues of a comic, and that was it.
I was
It
gonna say,
pretty
how
much
long
it.
did the Cops cartoon air for? How many years?
I think it was
Just
just
on for 1 year. It was 65
2
episodes.
seasons.
2 seasons?
Yeah, it might have
think
been
that was
2,
2
but it was
seasons.
60, 65 full episodes, which
I was
is
gonna
pretty
say,
good. That
I
was-
remember a lot of stories, so yeah, that's
Yeah.
why I thought it was.
Mhm.
Yeah. Fighting crime in a future
And
time.
then they had that is right.
Mhm.
And they had a 12-issue maxi series with at DC where they had like their own stories they told, which was
That's
pretty
how I got
cool
back into
as well.
comics.
I remember getting those. Oh,
That's got
yeah,
me
yeah.
back into
The
comics.
Cops,
The head of
yeah.
marketing was meeting with the DC editor and writer. We're going to do Cops. And he's like, Bart, why don't you bring your portfolio and sit in with me? I know you like comics and all that stuff. I'm like, all right. So they talked about it a little while, and the guy's like, hey, Bart brought his portfolio. Why don't you guys look at it? So I showed my portfolio with comic work in it, and they were like, "Do you want to draw comics?" I'm like, "Sure." So they hired me to do, and this is how comics work. They hired me to do issue 4 of Cops. I'm like, issue 4? It's like it's not even out yet. He's like, well, the guy doing issue 1 is still way behind where he's supposed to be. I'm like, okay. So I'll do issue 4. And then I call the guy when I get the issue in, and I'm like, hey, I just quit Hasbro. He's like, what do you mean quit Hasbro? I can't guarantee you work. I'm like, I'll be fine. Don't worry about it. The editor at DC. So I finished issue 4, and he's like, all right, great. Yeah, that looks good. And your next job's going to be issue 3. I'm like, just did issue 4.
That guy
Yeah.
was really behind.
He's like,
Yeah.
well, the
Apparently.
guy's still really behind. I'm like, all right, so
Apparently.
3 next, and then a bunch of colors, and moved on to other things. But
Hmm.
so I got back into comics.
That's
The
pretty
year
cool.
at Hasbro, I learned how to better use time and be more professional and more have a better quality control
Hmm.
to the work without spending, countless hours trying to make it perfect.
How long does that take? So if they say, well, we're looking for renderings or something for, this project, what's usually the timeline that you have to kind of flesh it out and produce something for them?
Usually with comics, it's like 1 page per day. So
Okay.
5 pages a week. That was the regular schedule, which wasn't always the case. Like you'd pencil a page a day and ink a page a day. Colorists could do more back then, but
Hmm.
that was the normal planned schedule anyways. But like I got into comics, my fourth project, actually my third project at DC, I had to do 24 pages in 3 days with pencils. That was a
Oh,
mess.
Wow.
Wow.
And
Because if you're talking
then,
about a page a day, and most
Yeah.
are 22 pages, you're talking like
Yeah.
a month. Now you got to do that in 2 days. Wow.
Yeah. No, it was
That's
18
crazy.
pages in 3 days. Sorry. So I had to do 6 a day.
That's still a lot.
That was not good work, but that's what they asked of me. And then I had this big 80-page monster, but that I had to do 8 pages a week for 10 weeks. That was tough, but I was able to keep the quality up on that, which was great. So
Wow.
that was very lucky.
Yeah, I think that's one thing you never really realize when you read and go, wow, this looks great. You don't think, wow, they're doing a page a day or whatever, even less. So that's pretty crazy,
Yeah.
that turnaround.
No,
they
now it's
create.
less. Most guys don't do monthly books anymore. I don't think the companies
Mhm.
even do monthly books. They do like arcs. So this guy will do 4
Yes.
series at the same time. He's working on 4 issues.
Yep.
Somebody else is working on the next 4,
Yep.
and then somebody else is working on the next 2 issue, and then somebody else is doing a 3. It's just
Yeah, there's
sad
no
to
more
me.
like
I'd love to get them up.
Spider-Man 500s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, all those are gone.
when you started with the comics, it always interested me. So you started just drawing figures growing up, characters. But once you started doing comics, was there that learning curve where you had to, you always see like different angles that the pictures are from, where it's down low and you're up high, or you're, just, I think the different angles they use make the story jump out versus,
Mhm.
did you have to learn that, or
Agreed.
was that just part of like art school and they
Yeah.
figured that out.
That's it's part of learning, but the narrative art part, that's the part I really, probably the only part I really love about drawing is that part, telling the story and making it interesting with the different camera angles and the different shots and making them tie
Yeah, I
together
was
and how
gonna say, it's
the
kind of like
panels,
being a
you know,
director.
progress story to story. That was the
Right.
interesting part. And that was a part that, you know, came naturally or more naturally to me.
I mean,
It's-
do
maybe
the writers give you guidance in the story like that, or is that just
They'll try,
you just create
but they
most of
aren't,
it?
most writers aren't visual.
Yeah.
You know, there's one or two I've worked with that are extremely visual. They see the story very visually, and comic writing is fun. I've known a lot of people that have written novels and, you know, movies and different stuff that wanted to write a comic and just fail miserably because it's such a different
Yes.
art form, you know.
Mhm.
And I've known a lot of guys that write comics that try to write novels and couldn't do that either, but
Right.
it's a very different art form.
Mhm.
But I was taught by Joe Kubert, no less, in the Kubert School,
Sure.
that once I got the script, whether it was a panel, you know, a plot, which is just, you know, page one, panel one, Joe sits in his chair. Page one, panel two, Joe looks up as Susie enters through the door. You know, that's simple. And sometimes a plot can just be a paragraph and you have to figure out what to draw completely, you know?
Mhm.
Gotta stretch it out 20 some odd pages.
Yeah. Like I did a comic Spider Woman that John Byrne wrote, and he just wrote a series of sentences. And I had to take those sentences and make them a 22-page story.
Oh, wow.
You know, there were no page breaks or anything, which was fine. That's fun for me. That's fodder. And some guys really like Alan Moore wrote a script for me once for Violator, a couple scripts, and it was like that thick.
Mhm.
I mean, he wrote, I mean, it was so detailed. He would describe everything on the desk room that had absolutely no significance in the story. You know, there were 4 pencils in the pencil holder, blah, blah. And he also did little thumbnail sketches of all the pages as he saw them. So I got this packet like this of a script. I'm like, what the hell? But what I learned, what Joe taught me is once you get that in your hands, that's your script. I mean, you can't change the story, but it's your job to tell the story.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I've always looked at the script. That's just my chum or whatever. You know, I use that as my story basis. If there's dialogue in the thing, you know, I make it work where it's got to go, but I'll change pages, add panels, you know, do whatever I need to tell the story the way I see it, because that's my job.
Right. Right. No, that's
Like the
interesting.
inker's job is to ink what I give him, but to embellish it. He's not supposed to trace it. What's the point of that?
Right.
You know, so, but he's supposed to, you know, take that raw material they get, whether it's the plot and script or the pencils or the inks or, you know, I guess the color's the last guy, but
Yeah.
and then make it their own. They have to add
Like-
something to it.
So I guess that's why, like, didn't like Frank Miller and Todd McFarlane, didn't they start to write and do the drawings at the same time for some reason?
Yeah,
Because I think
which-
they had that in their head. I guess what they
Well,
wanted to see.
The way a lot of comics, like strip comics, which is where it all grew from, you know, newspaper strips, a lot of those guys wrote and drew the strip themselves. But when it came to comic book production, you know, back in the day, they didn't make a lot of money. So if you were going to write a comic, you know, you need to write 4 or 5. If you were going to draw a comic, you wanted to draw 2 a month. You know, Jack Kirby could draw like 6 a month. You know, so you know, production was fast. So you didn't really have the luxury of, you know, crafting a story and drawing it. That only came later with. I mean, I think Frank Miller was the first major one to really grab hold of the writing reins and pencil at the same time. And then that got other guys thinking, hey, I can do that. So it changed the face of the industry. And now, you know, a lot of indie books were always that way, but now, you know, it's not uncommon for mainstream books to be that way. The only trouble with that is time. So I'm sure it's easier now if you're doing an indie book, which you're putting out for a year or a Kickstarter or something, or, you know, working on a mini series
Right.
for one of the bigger companies. It's a lot of work to write and draw one.
I gotta admit, yeah. And now, when you returned to you said, we returned to DC Marvel. How long did you work in the comic industry then at this point? You had the short term in the 80s, now you're back here in late
Well,
80s,
let's
early
see.
90s.
I worked at Hasbro for a year. So in '85, I started in comics. I think '86, roughly, I worked at Hasbro, and then '87 on, it was pretty much comics. Even though I did a lot of
Hmm.
toy work in there, I did a lot of stuff for Hasbro. Some remember the trace plate set they used to
Freelance.
do, where they were, yeah, all
Yeah.
freelance. They do those trace plates with they take a drawing and they raise up the thing so you put a paper over it.
Mhm.
You
Yeah, it's
get
like
the
those
image
fashion
when you trace
plates.
it. Yeah, exactly. I did a WWF back when it was WWF, a wrestler set, Batman set for the
Hmm.
second Batman movie back in the day.
That's
And
cool.
I did a bunch of wrestler toys, and then in the '90s, I did a whole mess of the Marvel Toy Biz Marvel Heroes
Oh,
line,
okay.
a boatload of figures for like
That was a
3 years.
pretty big line back at that point. It was like the first really, the very broad
Yeah,
Marvel line they did. It was a pretty cool one.
it was before McFarlane Toys took off and
Yes,
toys became more sculptural than
right.
movable. And now
That's
they've gone
correct.
back to be both, I guess.
Hmm. Even McFarlane is.
Yeah, yeah. So that was fun. But
Now, so what are some of the other series you got to work on? Like, were there dream projects or dream books that you were hoping that you got to do?
well, Justice League was really cool that I got to do Justice League Europe. That was the first big thing. I guess the second big thing I did because I did the Invasion series.
I remember
Um,
that.
and because I got hired to do a couple of those cops issues. I did a bunch of covers while I was waiting for other work, and he gave me Spectre Monthly
Mm,
as a book, and that was the one I had 6 pages done. And he called me on a Monday night and asked me if I wanted to do that 80-page giant issue 3 of Invasion when they used to do the big summer crossovers.
hmm
And I said, sure. And he's like, okay, well, bring in, you got to come in Friday for a meeting, Friday morning at 11. We're having a big meeting about it. Like, okay. And he's like, and you got to bring in pages. I'm like, all right, I'll bring in what I have done. He's like, well, no, you got to bring in all the pages. And there are 18 pages left. And that's when I had Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday to do the last 18 pages of, I think it was Spectre 21. So I did those and brought them in and did Invasion. The reason I got Invasion is that was McFarlane's big project at DC. It was his first big thing. And he quit because they hired him to do Spider-Man. So he left to do Spider-Man,
Ah,
and they had
Yeah.
nobody to do all this work suddenly. So that's how I got Invasion. And
Mm,
because I came in and did Invasion on time and did a good job, they gave me Justice League Europe to do as a
yeah.
reward because that's how it worked back in the day. Doesn't work that way anymore, but that's how it worked back then. And so that was really
Yeah.
cool. And did that for a while and got to do some Batman stuff and Legends of the Dark
Hmm,
Knight. And then I jumped ship to
That's cool.
Valiant, got to do Exo and Turok
Okay,
briefly.
yeah. Those were
And
cool.
then
Turek was a good one.
did some other stuff. What did I do? I don't know. Then I went back to Valiant when it was Acclaim and did more Exo. And at some point I got over to
Mm,
Marvel and did Spider Woman for a long time. And then I got to write and draw Blade, which was a blast.
Oh, yeah.
And
That's cool.
I
Was that
screwed
around the
the
time
schedule
of
on
the
that
movie?
horribly. Pardon?
Yeah. Was that before the movie then? I was
No, it was sadly after the movie. I did some Blade
okay.
stuff around the time of the movie, and they wanted to do a Blade monthly book. And they
Mm,
kept getting, and they hired me to do Blade monthly, and they kept getting proposals in from guys that just weren't good.
yeah.
And they didn't like them, and I didn't like them. And finally, I was like, after about a year, I was like, could I submit a proposal? And they were like, sure. So I submitted one, and they liked it, and they hired me to write and draw it. But
Nice.
they didn't push the schedule back any. So I think I drew 4 or 5, penciled 4 or 6 pages or something. And then I realized there was no way I was going to make the schedule, so I asked if I could do breakdowns instead. So I did breakdowns for the rest of issue 1 and the next 4 issues. But at that point, the schedule had pushed so badly that, I had to they had to bring in another artist to do the last 2 issues.
Now, what do you mean by breakdowns? Just so
I can show you. Let's see. This would be like a breakdown. Just like all the information, but it's not telling you where to put blacks or how to render.
Okay, like the detail in the background type of stuff would be that somebody else would take that, or
Well, there would be detail in the background.
okay, okay.
But then something like, let's see. Most of it. Here we go. And then this would be like more full pencils where everything's
Oh yeah.
drawn out,
Very cool.
and the inker
Gotcha.
just has to decide, how to use line rather than where to put blacks and rendering and texture.
Okay,
Gotcha.
so it's more like you do a really like just a nice detailed pencil sketch, and they sort of fill in that.
Yeah,
They
they do the finishing on
the shadows and
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, no,
And,
that makes
sometimes
sense.
you indicate it, but you don't have to be.
Yeah.
Pardon?
No, that makes sense. I just, obviously we're not
Yeah.
in the business, so I just
No,
wanted to
that's
understand
cool.
what you were talking about there. Yeah. No, it's neat.
No, that's good because I'm sure a lot of people don't know. And but breakdowns are obviously faster. Like I can do
Right.
6 pages of breakdowns a day isn't too big a deal.
Right.
4 to 6 is relatively easy, where a page of pencils is, sometimes 5 pages a week turns into Saturday too. So
Right. And that just makes it
Yeah, it's just a lot
so
less work.
the inker needs to do a little bit more on his end then.
exactly.
So
So you get paid a little less for breakdowns. He gets paid a little more for finishes.
gotcha.
But and that's how I did most of Spider-Woman was breakdowns, which because strangely they paid you very little less to do so much less work. So I was like, I'm no fool. This is a commercial
I feel
art.
like I've been busting my ass all these years.
Yeah. So
now,
that's
what
kinda
other
how
types
that
of
went. Yeah.
have you've expanded out past comics and toys? Have you done other sorts of projects?
Yeah, I've done a lot of video game concept art and stuff. I've worked at a couple of companies and done quite a bit freelance. I did all the concept art for a Universal Monsters video game that was canceled, of course, after The Mummy came out with Tom Cruise. They canceled.
Yeah.
They canceled every project after that movie came out. That stunk.
Yeah.
They had just started doing they just started, sculpting a bunch of figures and doing some preliminary animations and stuff. And I was like, oh, but that would have been cool. Yeah. No video game I've ever worked on has actually been produced. So
Really? There's
Yeah.
that many that are just concepts that they actually don't push forward, huh? Wow.
yeah, they'll spend most of these were for small companies, so there weren't, billions of dollars. I mean, they're barely any money spent because they pay you dirt in those situations when they're small companies, but still would have been nice to have one completed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No
I'm
doubt.
sure. Yeah. Be kind of cool to see that realized on screen.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, obviously you have a ton of artwork. You were just showing us behind you there. So what is it that you're working on these days?
These days I just finished a video game gig that will never be produced. Nothing I did will. They might come out with a game, but it was supposed to come out.
Right.
It was supposed to come out in September, then October, then after, and I don't know. I haven't been there since October, so I don't know if it'll ever come out or how it's going to change or something. But nothing I did will ever be in there. And let's see, working on some odd comic jobs and commissions and some of my own projects. Got some pitches out, hopefully they'll take, hopefully I should hear.
Would that be like
next
comic based
video.
stuff?
Yeah. Yep.
Cool.
Yep. So
Very
we'll
cool.
see. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Is it a lot easier these days? Like back when you started, you had to basically move to New York City, right? To do
Well,
the artwork. Weren't they all in a
I was lucky
building?
I was close enough so I could drive in,
You could drive in.
Syracuse, you know,
Yeah.
and so I could go in and you show up on the doorstep. That's how I got the marble work. I just showed up one day
Yeah.
and knocked at the door. It was like, anybody free to look at a portfolio? And they were like, let's see who's free. So I got it and walked around and met
Wow.
a couple guys and got work.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was far different times. I
Yeah.
would say it's much harder now.
Really.
Yeah, now you walk through the
So
door,
many more
back in with a
people.
portfolio. They're like,
Oh yeah, they're never gonna-
dirty.
But you know, now everybody wants to draw comics, everybody wants to, video game art, and with the advent of computers, you know, almost anyone, with enough training can do really high level art. So
Mhm.
so much of his paint over photos, different stuff. It's
Yep.
it's a different world and much more competitive than it was. When I got into comics, like I said before, nobody wanted to draw
Mm.
Hmm.
them.
And you
So it was
think
like-
too, back then, a standard print run was, a few million copies they print. That was
Right.
the big
Yeah.
studios. Nowadays, it's such a fraction of that.
Oh, God,
Um,
yeah. DC would
it's-
think about killing a book when I was there in the 80s if it dropped to 30,000 orders. That's when they would think about it. Now, if you've got a book
Yeah.
with 3,000 orders, it's top of the list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Right.
That's a hit.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a whole
It's-
different
it's-
business.
Mhm.
So,
Hmm.
but now
No,
there's 8 million copies every month, or 8 million comics that come out.
Yeah.
Back when I started, there weren't nearly as many books.
Right.
as there are now.
Right. They saturated the market, and I think that helped kind of
Yeah.
kill it off a little bit because it was
No.
like you couldn't collect everything anymore. Like when you were a kid. When you're a kid, you could basically get just about everything they were releasing from Marvel that
Well,
week or what.
Yeah. I think when I started, DC might have had 20 monthly titles.
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah. You
And-
could go to the comic book shop with a $5 bill and come
Yeah.
out with a pretty big
Oh,
stack.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nowadays you get one for
Yeah.
$5.
You get one.
If you're lucky.
You get
You
one.
know?
Maybe.
If you're
Yeah.
lucky. But printing's got so crazy expensive too, unless
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
printing. I mean,
Yeah.
but printing was so cheap back then because they were
Mhm.
printing so many. I mean, when I started, like I think the top of the line DC or Marvel book would maybe sell 400,000 or 500,000 copies
Mhm.
in that range.
Yeah.
And most of their books were selling 150, 200,000 in that range. And then, but in the 90s, when the collectors got into it,
Yeah.
they were going 3 million copies, 4 million copies, 6
Well,
million
because they
copies.
did variants, they had
Yep.
different covers, and this you
Yep.
had to have them all. Believe me, I know because I got them, and now they're not worth anything. So, but and I do remember, I remember Stan Lee tried that foray into online comics, and that really never took off. So
No,
I think
still
that
really
killed
hasn't.
it. Yeah.
So it really hasn't. I mean, it's just a different format. It's difficult. I don't think anybody's cracked that online nut.
Yeah,
They-
it's,
Well,
it's not the
super
same.
successful.
Yeah.
No, and I got to tell you, even because I used to love the comics of the 70s and 80s, and maybe
Mhm.
it could have been asbestos for all I know, but I used to love to just smell them. You know what I mean?
The smell of
Yes.
that new print.
The smell
Absolutely.
of those comics.
Yeah.
It
You
could have
were-
been, I don't know, yeah.
Every kid that ever cracked a comic and fell in love, that smell, it just brings them right
Yeah,
back.
it
Yep.
does.
Right
yeah.
back. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah,
you
you're
can
not
say
gonna
the
get
same
that.
thing.
You know?
The
It don't
same
smell
thing
the
can be
same
said.
anymore, and I love that old newsprint and flat
Yes.
color and all
Yes.
discolored.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like 4-color, but yeah, exactly.
Love that stuff.
But the same can be said too about the toy industry. I mean, it's not the same as it was when you were there. It was like golden age. There were so
Yeah,
many
right.
cool concepts and characters, and everything was driven by
I tell you, one of the coolest
those designs, and then
things. One of the coolest things that I got to do when Hasbro hired me, and I was there 2 weeks, and I designed two GI Joes, and then they put me immediately on Cops. And my first task was to go to the toy store and get whatever I wanted. As reference.
cool.
So I got a bunch of He-Man
Cool.
shit and all kinds
Oh,
of stuff.
yeah.
I don't know how much I spent. It was probably only a couple $100 at the time, but I came back with armloads.
They give you like a
awesome.
corporate credit card and they're like, go for it, go nuts.
I think it just you
Yeah,
paid for it and then turned it into your volume.
turn
Yeah.
into receipts.
Yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
awesome though. I mean, how
Yeah.
much fun is that?
You gotta
I mean,
have your
we're-
whole-
Just it's great research.
yeah, it's great research. You put them all in your basement, and you're like, nah, nobody opened nothing.
I'm gonna lock
Actually,
my
they're all
office
still
door
in
for a
Hasbro.
while
I
and just
didn't
kind of play.
the stuff.
Yeah.
I was not that way. I couldn't do it.
Yeah,
But
well, that's cool.
the other funny thing about Hasbro is there were two boys toys character artists, Ron Rudat and my buddy Mark Pennington. We're both on GI Joe, and I think Ron was at that time doing some more high level concept stuff with they had a couple guys that were just doing like dream design stuff down in some special room or whatever. But after about 6 weeks or something, they pulled me aside, Ron and Mark, and they said, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, you're making us look bad. I'm like, you're working too fast. We have created a system here.
Right.
So I swear to God, my year at Hasbro, I did this most of the time.
You're just sitting there,
Try to throw a
I mean,
pencil into the ceiling.
I could have done 6 years of cops easy, but
Yeah.
it's just, and Ron was over there painting his own stuff, and Mark's over there inking comic books, and the boss would walk in, and they didn't care, but I couldn't draw anything else in Hasbro. So, I mean, I was paid to be there and work, so I did the work. It just wasn't
Right.
a lot, but I was like, God, I just couldn't sit there and work on other stuff. I was breaking out a sweat if I pulled out some other cover I had to draw or something. I just could not do it.
it's always the old timers. They're like, "What are you doing?
Yeah.
You're killing us over here."
Okay, I'd walk into some cubicle looking for a guy. Man, and finally I realized that they take naps under their tables.
Ah,
God,
Oh,
granted, the pay was dirt. I mean, it really was.
Right,
I mean, at least
Yeah.
for me starting out, it was dirt.
oh, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but still, it was nuts.
No,
No,
well, it's awesome though.
You've probably been through the the convention ringer quite
yeah.
a bit,
Yep.
What are some of the bigger ones that you've attended that are in over the years?
Well, San Diego used to be great. I used to love to go to San Diego before it became a celebrity show.
Yeah, like mainstream
Right.
and every I mean,
Yeah.
Right. It's comics, you went.
Yeah,
and
it was
like,
just comics, and it was 100,000 people coming to look at
Right.
comics and that loved comics from all over the world, and that was a great show back in the early 90s. That was a great show, and even up into the early 2000s. Up at the time, that was about the time Wizards started doing movie stuff and
Yeah.
got out of the toy thing, and that's just when the shows started doing celebrity signings and stuff. I guess it was in the early 2000s.
Right.
And that's when the
Yep.
shows really started to change. And the last time I did San Diego was 2015 or something, and I would never go back. I mean, if I had a TV show,
Yeah, I hear that a lot. I hear
I'd go
that
there for
a lot
comics.
from a lot of artists.
Yeah, I wouldn't do
It's
that.
not
I mean,
the
there's
same.
still some good comic shows. There's Baltimore. There's is it South Carolina? I can't think of the name of that one. It's in Greenville. That's a good one. And then there's been a few more that spring up that cater mostly to comics, which are pretty cool. And there's apparently a good one in Connecticut, which I'm finally getting to go to this year.
Terrificon, I think it's a.
Yeah, Terrificon. That's supposed to be a great comic show. So I'm looking forward to that. And there's some of the smaller shows are pretty good comic shows, still, but they all have some celebrity presence these days, which is fun. I was at show a couple of years ago, and Sergeant Slaughter was there. I think his son goes to the shows with him because he's older now. And after the show, they were sitting there in a bar, and I was next to him. We weren't together, but the UFC was on the bar camera, And I overheard Slaughter, he tapped his son. He's like, look at that fake fighting. And he started rolling. It was funnier than hell. Because I, of course, was there in the 80s. When, wrestling was, the expose is wrestling was fake. And
Yeah.
I got his eardrums popped, the reporter, and,
Yeah. Yeah.
insane. And it was funny to see that was something that obviously resonated with the Sarge.
Yep.
So, who is the only living G.I. Joe? The only actual human G.I. Joe, other him.
Yeah, that's
Tyson.
true.
Yeah, because there was Refrigerator Perry, but he's passed along.
Yep.
Oh, maybe it was Refrigerator, not Tyson.
Yep.
Yeah, he's passed on. So the Sarge is the last one, the actual living.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that. You're right.
Yeah, Rocky was supposed to be, but it never came to fruition. It was planned, but never happened.
Yeah. So that
Right.
was cool.
And that's for the best. What the hell is Rocky gonna
Right.
do? I mean, Jesus.
Right. Rambo, yes. Rocky, no.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Oh, Christ.
Yeah.
But it's funny. You get to see a lot of crazy stuff. I did a show in Saudi Arabia.
Oh, neat.
Really?
That was nuts. And
Are the comics sell well there or no? Okay, I was gonna say I'm like, what
it
the hell is
was
that?
paid for by the royal family.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
And the show shut down. They kicked everybody out, and you had to stay there. As one of the princes who loves comics came through, and he went to all the booths and come to mine. But
That's too
he went to the
funny.
booths he wanted to and bought artwork, and comics, and different stuff. And they
So
would come
essentially-
and tell you, okay, you can go now.
Yeah, it was essentially a show for the prince to get some artwork.
I was gonna say it's a little. I can see that being a little sketchy,
much.
like you draw for the prince now. Okay, all right, no.
You can't leave.
But a couple of the guys I met, though, and this is funny, an actor and his cousin. I met him on the plane out. We were on the same flight, and I think I met him on the way out there. Realized we were both going to the same place for the same thing, and I saw them like the Sunday morning of the last day of the show or something, and they looked like hell. And they were like, "Oh, we didn't get into like 4." I'm like, "What happened?" They're like, "Well, these guys came along and asked us if we want to go to a party after the show, because he's an actor and it's cool to have an actor at the party." So they were picked up outside the hotel, in a black SUV, and they're driving, and it's dark. There's not a lot of lights all over. If you're in the heart of the city, there's nowhere else there's street lights or anything. And they're driving in the dark, and they're getting kind of nervous. They're going, for like an hour or something.
Yeah.
And they have no idea where they're going. And suddenly they can see like lights up ahead, and it's like a walled compound. And then as they get closer, they hear rock music and disco, and lights are flashing, and they go inside, and it's some guy's, private, whatever, mansion, compound, whatever.
Yeah.
And, it was this huge party, alcohol, drugs, rock music, everybody dancing, nobody, wearing any of, just girls. And they were like, "This is crazy." And they walk around the place, and there's like just solid gold grandfather clocks and just immense wealth just dripping everywhere. And they're talking to the guys, and they're like, "Well, where do you guys get alcohol? Because, it's a sin there, basically." And they're like, "The Army base."
Yeah.
U.S. Army base. So
Wow.
it's a huge black market there. And of course, they're hypocrites with all their.
Oh, right. They want
It's-
they want that Western.
Everyone with
lifestyle.
money in Saudi Arabia is part of the royal family. And I probably shouldn't be saying it.
That's okay. They're not watching. Believe
They
me.
won't listen.
But
They're not listening.
You know,
to that.
Edit that out, Kyle.
Yeah.
it was just crazy. But met a lot of young female artists who were really into comics and really into drawing. Had their little Instagram accounts, doing their stuff, and had so many questions, and were so nice and pleasant. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
It's a great, unique experience right there. I mean,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep. It was really cool. It was pretty fun.
Yeah.
Strange, but
I
fun.
can imagine.
Yeah.
Especially in a culture that's not accustomed to,
Yeah.
comics like this culture is. So it's,
Right,
it's gotta be
right.
a little different.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Who knows
it was
over
pretty
there?
bizarre.
It might throw you off a building for drawing over there. You never know.
Who knows? Who knows? But they're cool. A lot of those Middle Eastern countries are really trying to get into comics and build their culture there, I guess. You know, Abu Dhabi's big.
Maybe
Yeah,
they'll call you
goes
for a
there.
gig, you know? Maybe you over there.
Yeah, they're trying to get their own comic companies going, and of course,
Wow.
money's no problem. So
Yeah,
Right, right.
exactly.
so they tend to hire, you know, editors and people here that know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Help train
I mean,
their own
they
artists,
just
writers.
bought their own golf league. You know what I mean? So I'm assuming they got some cash for comic books over
A
there.
little bit of
on the
cash.
side,
Right their own,
yeah.
yeah.
Other cash.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Holy Christ.
Uh,
Well, that's pretty cool. So you have
Yeah.
anything you're going to, anything to plug here before we shut her down? Or?
No.
No? Okay. Well,
He's like, yeah.
Not really. Just my website, BartSearsArt.com.
Cool. BartSears.com. Yeah.
If I can send you guys some
Check it out.
toy art if you want to show it during
Absolutely.
this. Soon
I'd
this
love to.
edited.
Yeah.
I'll
yeah.
send you some of the Cops toy art, some of the W.
Oh, awesome.
Well,
love to see that.
that'd be
be
You
cool.
great.
guys pop up, BartSearsArt.com. That'd be great.
And I recommend
Excellent.
it. The website is incredible. I mean, the artwork and what you've got displayed is just mind blowing.
Oh, thank
It's
you, man.
incredible work.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it. I'm like, wow, yeah, just in awe. And I'm like, yeah, to be able to have that kind of a talent, you know, being in art class years ago and trying to, you know, draw things out and taking it to that next level is just,
Mhm.
it's,
Thanks, man.
yeah. So thanks for being part of our
Yeah.
growth. And
Yeah.
It's been
no.
fun, man.
I
Anytime.
hope
Awesome.
hope we can have you back sometime because you got a lot of
Definitely.
good stories. It's fun.
Oh,
Yeah.
it'd be great. Anytime.
Yeah. Excellent.
It's been a
thank you
blast.
so much for it.
All right.
Okay,
Thanks so
Bart,
much.
thank you.
Thanks, guys. Nice
Take
to meet you,
care.
Rich.
Nice to meet you.
Here, I'll see you again, Kyle.
All right. We'll see you soon.
All right. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.